After being tricked by his best friend, a young man who has had his body possessed by the spirit of a demonic clown is recruited to take part in an insane game. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Animal World, from 2018. In the 2000s, there was a TV cartoon called Super Clown and, since the age of 8, Jung hasn't been able to get the scene of the clown fighting a group of monsters in the subway out of his mind. Due to a traumatic episode that took his father's life, the young man came to believe that there was a clown inside him, and every time Jung experiences strong emotions, the clown appears. When this happens, he has the impression that people turn into terrifying creatures and attack him. The doctor says it's some kind of mental illness, but Jung doesn't agree. He believes he has some mysterious connection with clowns. One night, the young man decides to recreate the scene from the cartoon and invades a subway full of monsters. When attacked by the creatures, the clown draws his swords and uses the blades to cut his enemies' bodies in half. Despite being outnumbered, Jung manages to get rid of those monsters with ease due to his excellent martial arts skills. However, these battles only happen in his head, because the truth is that he works as a clown in an amusement park to earn a living. One day, knowing that Jung needs money to take care of his sick mother, his childhood friend offers him a deal he can't refuse. All the young man has to do is mortgage his house to get the initial amount needed to make an investment, but Jung refuses. After removing his makeup, he goes to the hospital to spend the afternoon with his mother, who is in a coma. For several years, Jung has had this same routine and ended up falling in love with one of the hospital nurses, who became his best friend. Seeing Lu taking care of the patients, the young man approaches her, but instead of trying to win her over, he asks to borrow money. This time, however, Lu refuses to help him because she is too angry. Every day, she is humiliated by the patients and Jung advises her to quit her job. However, he doesn't have the money to support her, which makes him rethink Jun Li's offer. Furious at the patient who tries to take advantage of his friend, the young man lets the clown take over his body and attacks him. At that moment, the elderly man lying on the stretcher next to him begins to suffer a cardiac arrest and Jung decides to stop the attack. After having his hand bandaged, he goes to talk to Lu and finds out that, because of him, the nurse is in danger of being fired. Hours later, at the end of his working hours, Lu goes to say goodbye and hands Jung a packed lunch for dinner. She also gives him the money he borrowed and leaves in frustration, realizing that she will never be able to start a serious relationship with him. That night, Jung decides to call Jun Li and signs the contract to mortgage his mother's house before even reading the clauses. His friend then hands the document to Ando and Jung soon begins to suspect that there is something wrong with him. That day, on his way home, the young man realizes that he is being followed by a motorcyclist, but decides to ignore him. 3 days later, he receives a message from Jun Li and discovers that they have both fallen into trouble. While his friend promises that he will fix the mistake he made, he is attacked by someone mysterious and Jung realizes that he is also in danger. Immediately, the clown that lives inside him begins to want to manifest itself, but the young man manages to control it and goes to talk to Jun Li's old boss to try to find out what happened to him. Just then, the young man receives an anonymous call and the man on the other end of the line orders him to walk to the window. In doing so, Jung runs into Ando, the guy he met at the hospital, and ends up being taken to see Anderson, his boss. During a conversation with the old man, he discovers that Jun Li used his mother's house as collateral to take out a loan worth 6 million yuan and then spent all that money in a casino. The problem is that Jung's mother's house is valued at less than half the amount of the loan, so adding up all the interest, the young man now has a debt of more than 8 million yuan. However, Anderson claims that Jung is a lucky young man and reveals that he arrived in time for the Destiny Cruise's annual sailing. In 3 days, this ship will leave Arakakamakabo Island with dozens of debtors on board. All these people will take part in a game and those who are lucky enough to win will receive a large sum of money. Immediately, Jung asks what the game is about and Anderson says that he won't know until he gets on the ship. With no prospect of being able to pay off that debt in any other way, the young man decides to sign a new contract to take part in this mysterious game. On the day of the trip, Jung goes to the hospital and tells Lu that he is going on a business trip. He then gives her some money and asks her to look after his mother. Immediately, the nurse realizes that her friend is in trouble and tries to stop him from going, but Jung says he has to do it. Before leaving, the young man promises that if he manages to return, he will marry Lu. However, if he doesn't return, the young woman will have to move on and meet someone else. After saying goodbye to his mother, Jung follows Ando to a garage where some other players are. At this point, all the members of the group are given an injection to help them sleep, but when it comes to Jung, the clown takes over his body and he begins to think of a way to escape. After attacking the man who wanted to inject the serum into his body, the young man plans to steal a car to try and escape, but is chased by bikers. While going through a tunnel at high speed, he manages to get rid of most of the enemies, but Ando keeps after him and manages to break into his car. However, during the escape, Jung is able to throw him out and the man ends up being run over. After drawing up his escape plan, the young man begins to put it into practice. However, contrary to what he thought would happen, Endo grabs a pistol and shoots a tranquilizer dart into his neck. When he wakes up, Jung is already trapped inside the Destiny ship with the other players and realizes that there is no going back. The only way to survive is to win that game. After the ship leaves the island, all the contestants walk to the main hall and are greeted by Anderson, who is there to present the rules of the game. Each player has 12 cards divided between rock, paper, or scissors. They also have 3 5-pointed stars, which must be given to the winner of each round. The game will last 4 hours and, to win, the contestants will have to play all 12 cards without losing any stars. Anyone who doesn't have at least 3 stars at the end of the 4 hours will be eliminated. Another rule is that cards and stars can be transferred or traded freely, as long as it doesn't involve physical attacks to get them. In the very first minutes of the game, Jung is approached by Jing-kun, who claims that all the cameras inside that hall are used to broadcast the match to rich guys who are betting on their favorite players on the other side of the screen. Jing-kun then reveals that it's not the first time he's taken part in the game and many of his opponents aren't beginners either. After revealing this information, the man invites Jung to form an alliance and the young man decides to trust him. They both agree to play the same cards during the match to tie the game. That way, neither of them has to lose a star and they get rid of their cards. However, in the third round, Jing-kun makes a mistake and Jung is defeated. Even so, Jing-kun manages to convince the young man to continue trusting his strategy and promises that he will return his star in the next round. It's at this point that Jung ends up being tricked for the second time and realizes that he's facing a trickster. Now that he only has 1 star, the young man walks around the hall bewildered and, looking at the faces of the other contestants, begins to mistake them for monsters. During his psychotic break, he ends up fainting and is woken up by Jun Lee, who has also been recruited to take part in the game. The man lost his house in another contract he signed with Anderson and decided to take part in the game to try and get it back. So the two decide to team up to collect more stars and call a guy who has used up all his cards to join them. At this point, Jung is tricked once again and ends up losing one of his cards. However, by playing it in a game, Meng loses another star. Regretting what he had done, the traitor says he thought the pair were trying to trick him and asks for another chance to join the team. So Jung decides to take him on again and orders Meng to observe the play of some opponents so that they can increase their chances of winning the next matches. In this way, Jung manages to beat his opponent in every round and gets 4 stars. Suddenly, the game is interrupted by Anderson, who has decided to use one player to teach everyone else a lesson. The old man reveals that the guy was caught by the security guards trying to flush the cards down the toilet, because he wanted to get rid of them without risking losing his stars during the games. However, this is considered a serious violation, as all cards must be spent during matches. So, as well as disqualifying that player, Anderson decides to shoot him so that he can serve as an example to the others. As each competitor is entitled to take out a loan during the game, Jung and his team decide to take out $500,000 in cash to buy stars, even though they will have to pay exorbitant interest in the future. However, instead of spending all that money buying stars, the young man decides to buy cards, as they are much cheaper. Looking at the scoreboard, Jung notices that the card that came up the least in all the rounds was paper. So when the game is about to end, the only cards left in the player's hands are rock and scissors. So Jung decides to buy only the stone cards, so they won't lose any matches. As there are no new cards available for sale, the trio need to buy their opponent's cards, so they decide to split up to avoid arousing suspicion. After sharing the cards and stars with his allies, Jung asks Meng to go to the arcade and watch the scoreboard to let them know when the paper cards are finished. Meanwhile, Jun Lee talks to his old friend about his 8th birthday, which culminated in a tragedy. During the celebratory dinner, a man broke into their house whistling and Jung was trapped in the living room while his parents were attacked. While he cried with despair, the young man listened to the Super Clown cartoon on TV and, since then, he has taken on this second personality. Suddenly, Meng appears and informs his friends that something is wrong. When they look at the scoreboard, they notice that the ratio is different from what they expected. Now, the stones and papers are even while the scissors are dwindling. This is actually a big problem, as they have a lot of stones. Analyzing the new scenario, Jung comes to the conclusion that someone has discovered his plan and is collecting the paper cards, leaving only the scissors circulating in the game. Desperate to realize that they are about to sink into the mud, Jun-Li and Meng decide to gamble and start losing the few stars they have. Minutes later, the three friends meet again to come up with a new plan, and suddenly Luca approaches. The young man then says that he realized the trio's strategy and began to act, buying up most of the paper cards that were still in circulation. At that moment, Luca challenges Jung to a game and says that if the young man manages to beat him, he will win 3 stars. To do this, Jung needs the support of his friends, who risk their lives to bet their stars on a single match. That way, if Jung loses the game, both he and his allies will be eliminated. However, if the young man wins, each member of his group will get 2 stars. Since he has 3 extra stars, Luca decides to accept the challenge, because even if he loses the match, both he and his allies will still be in the game. However, before the round begins, Luca decides to add one more demand and states that he will only accept the challenge if Jung agrees to hand over all his money to him if he loses the duel. Knowing that the money will be useless if he is eliminated, he decides to accept this condition and takes his place at the table. However, just as he was about to play his card, Luca begins to transform and Jung sees his opponent turning into a monster right before his eyes. However, as usual, the young man knows it's just a figment of his mind and carries on as normal. As he is very confident of the outcome, Luca is the first to play the card and Jung knows that he has played paper. What his opponent doesn't realize, however, is that the young man also has some scissors and manages to defeat him by playing this card on the table. In the end, as well as taking his opponent's extra 3 stars, Jung manages to buy the extra cards his friends have. He then goes to break the news to Luca, and now the man finds himself at a crossroads. Realizing that his allies have left with their stars and abandoned him, Luca no longer has a reliable alliance to play with and must find a way to get rid of his cards without risking losing stars. As a result, Luca is forced to pay $100,000 so that Jung can keep his cards and he can advance to the winner's hall. After taking the money, Jung is approached by Jing-kun, who says that all the people who bought cards in the previous games have been eliminated. After stating that this is a bad strategy, he offers Jung a star to deliver his letters to his friends and abandoned ship, but the young man refuses to betray his team. The man then tells about his experience in a previous game, where he was eliminated for having only 1 star. That time, Jing-kun was lucky enough to escape, but before leaving the ship he found the medical laboratory hidden on deck, where scientists conduct genetic experiments on the eliminated players. However, even after hearing this story, Jung remains firm in his decision and remains loyal to his team so that they can all get off that ship together. In total, their group has 69 cards distributed over the 3 categories, only 5 of which are scissors. In addition to the 3 of them, there are 38 other players in the room and 22 of them are without cards, just waiting to buy stars. So the trio must hurry, because very soon the other competitors will lose all their cards and they will have no chance of getting the 3 stars they need. However, before Jung can act, Jing-kun decides to disrupt his plans and reveals that the young man already knows his opponent's cards. In this way, he manages to convince the other players to shuffle their cards and, in order to have the right to play with the others, Jung must also take part in the process. After shuffling all the cards, Jing-kun returns them to his opponents, but when it's time to hand over Jung's cards, he decides to throw them up in the air. Jing-kun then starts a feud with the young man, who has to run to help his friends collect all the cards. After counting them, Jung realizes that he has all the papers, so he sees the chance to unmask his enemy, who was using the stones to steal the other players' stars. From the start, Jing-kun has been playing dirty and kept cheating by shuffling the cards. The man gave most of the papers to Jung and kept almost all the stones. As a result, all the other players were left with scissors and became easy targets for Jing-kun. To compensate for this disadvantage, Jung decides to play without looking at his cards. As he is the only one with cards from all 3 categories, he decides to place them randomly on the table and give his opponent the opportunity to choose the card he will play. So Jung wins the player's trust and, despite losing some stars, he gets the chance to play against his biggest opponent. As no one else agrees to take part in a match with Jing-kun, the trickster has no choice but to enter a contest against Jung, because that's the only way he'll be able to get rid of his cards and stay in the game. By looking at all the cards he has, Jung manages to deduce his opponent's cards and wins the missing stars so that he and his friends can get off the ship. However, as the game ran out of time before he could play all the cards he had bought, he was eliminated and joined the other losers. At the end of the game, Anderson announces that the players who haven't been eliminated will have 10 minutes to sell and buy stars. For those who have taken out loans, they will have to use the extra stars to pay off part of their debt, along with the interest. However, instead of exchanging his extra stars for money, Jun-Li decides to use them to save Jung, but Meng tries to stop him. When he discovers that each star can bring in $500,000, the trader decides to sell them instead of rescuing the guy who helped him get there. In his defense, Meng uses the argument that they will have to pay a huge interest rate on the $500,000 they borrowed, so the best way to get off that ship debt-free is to sell those stars. On hearing this, Jun Li ends up being convinced to support him and asks for forgiveness for turning his back on Jung, but promises that he will take care of his mother. Once again, the young man is passed over by his childhood friend. Furious at having been abandoned, Jung begins to think of a solution to escape, and when he realizes that one of the prisoners in his cell has a package filled with money, the young man attacks him. However, it's not long before he's captured by the guards and Scarface manages to get out, as a group of men have used extra stars to rescue him. Looking at the bundle of money the man was carrying, Jung realized that there was no more than $500,000 inside. Therefore, in order to be released, Scarface would have to possess something more valuable to pay for his freedom. In addition, Jung noticed that the bandage on his back was too tight, which would prevent the flesh from regenerating. Then the young man began to suspect that it was a fake bandage, used only to hide something valuable enough to be worth a prisoner's freedom. So Jung fakes a fight just to get the chance to steal it and discovers that there are diamonds hidden there. When they realize that the bandage has ended up in the young man's hands, the guys who went there to free Scarface use 3 more stars to get Jung released, because that's the only way they'll get their diamonds back. After gaining his freedom, the young man goes after Meng and strikes him mercilessly, just like the clown did to the monsters in the subway. After getting his money and the stars back, Jung decides to use them to free the old man who was imprisoned with him, because he knows that the old man has a sick son to look after. After leaving the ship, Jung goes to meet Lu and runs to hug her. A few days later, he spots Ando walking through the hospital corridors and decides to go after him. When he finds him, the young man hears the same whistles he heard on the night of his 8th birthday and discovers that Anderson was the man who broke into his house. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.